We have more for your ears only. I'm Eddie Robinson.
I'm David Alpern with this quote from the news. What's with the dominatrix like black suit Susan Rice is wearing? When was the last time Ben Rhodes said something not painfully banal and obvious? Those are two of the snarky tweets by White House National Security Council staffer Jofi Joseph under the Twitter handle @NatSecWonk that cost him his job. Also last week, former NSA and CIA Director Michael Hayden was embarrassed by tweets from a fellow train passenger who overheard his cell call with reporters about U.S. surveillance policies. Now this.
Admiral Burke and General LeMay, representing the Navy and the Air Force, were incredible characters. I mean, they were both very good fighting men, but to have them as members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they were so intemperate and so unaware of the dangers of nuclear war or of the sensitivity of the political equilibrium. Kennedy in particular could not stand LeMay.
Historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr. combined the mind of a scholar, the heart of a crusader, and the savvy of a politician. Over the years, he also gained access as a trusted advisor in many quarters of liberalism, and especially the White House of John F. Kennedy, about which he later wrote and spoke with insight and candor. In the clip we just heard, he was explaining JFK's support of the film 7 Days in May to spotlight the dangers of excessive militarism.
Beyond the small mountain of books Professor Schlesinger himself published, much insight into the man and his views came from an edited version of his diary several years ago, the work of his sons Andrew and Stephen. And this week they unveil yet another valuable volume, The Letters of Arthur Schlesinger Jr. from Random House, written to Kennedy, other world leaders, and cultural icons from Gore Vidal to Groucho Marx. Their father's correspondence further illuminates his wisdom, wit, and evolving vision of America. Now, for a preview of the book, for your ears only, we're joined again by co-editor Stephen Schlesinger, my friend, a one-time journalist and former director of the World Policy Institute. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Your father wrote both of the ages and for the ages, including so much of his personal correspondence. Where were his letters? How many did you have to sift through, and how many are in the book, more or less?
Well, most of the letters are in the New York Public Library. Just before he died, he deeded his archives, probably 80 to 85% of his letters, to the library, and that's where most of the research was done on this book. We estimated there was about 35,000 letters, which I thought was gargantuan until I just learned recently that Norman Mailer, in a biography just came out, produced 45,000 letters. But nonetheless, there was a lot of letters to go through. And as to how many we selected in the end, there are only about 375 letters in this book, although the book runs about 500 or 600 pages.
How different in style and tone are the letters from the diaries? Are they more passionate or humorous because they were meant to persuade or entertain other people?
The letters were certainly different in tone. The diary, remember, was his immediate impression of events that happened either the day before, or a week before, or even hours before, when he got home and started writing up notes on what he'd learned from conversations or encounters. And so they tend to be more gossipy. They tend to be more very quick capsule summaries of things, maybe a brief snatch of conversation here or there. Whereas the letters are more reflective, they're more thoughtful. He spent some time thinking through exactly what the point he wanted to make. And in that sense, they, in many ways, were more serious.
With the 50th anniversary of Kennedy's assassination fast approaching, we have to ask if there's a single letter to JFK that most stands out in your mind.
Well, actually, the most interesting letter is one that was written before he became president. My father and he had been friends for many years, from when he was in Congress and then became senator from Massachusetts, which is, of course, where my father resided, in Cambridge, when he taught at Harvard. And at one point, Kennedy asked my father to critique the draft of his book, which won the Pulitzer Prize, Profiles in Courage. And he writes a 7-page letter in which he critiques a couple of the choices that Kennedy made for the profiles in Courage. And one of them was Daniel Webster. And he felt that Webster had been endorsed for the wrong reason, and he made clear to Kennedy that he thought this was the impossible person to honor in this sense. So that letter in particular shows that even with people he loved, and he certainly loved JFK, he was willing to be quite blunt.
After JFK's assassination, he sent handwritten condolences to the widowed First Lady. I wonder if he wrote much about the assassination itself and all the conspiracy theories.
Oddly enough, there's not a single letter that gets into the issue of the assassination in this book. There are allusions at points where he kind of raises questions about, did the Warren Commission really make a final and complete analysis and investigation of what happened? I think he told me that at times he felt that there had to be something more than the idea that there was only one assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, but he was never sure where the additional truth would come from, and he certainly didn't believe many of these conspiracy theorists.
What about letters to later presidents and their top aides? Henry Kissinger, for example, in the Nixon years.
Henry Kissinger and my father had been colleagues at Harvard, and Kissinger always felt that my father had given him a position which he allowed him to become a national figure. My father had asked the Council on Foreign Relations to appoint Henry Kissinger to a research commission on nuclear weapons, and as a result, Kissinger wrote a famous book called Nuclear Weapons in American Foreign Policy, which made him, for the first time, gave him national recognition. So the two of them were closely, in a personal way, linked, but they did have their ups and downs, and when Kissinger joined the Nixon administration, my father, in his own way, which is to be perfectly blunt and honest about what he felt, did write letters to Kissinger, which are in the book, protesting, first of all, the Vietnam War and the way Nixon was handling it, and also the Cambodian invasion by the U.S., and also Kissinger's involvement in the wiretapping of colleagues in the administration. So these show that even though he had a personal friendship with Kissinger, he was perfectly happy and willing to let Kissinger know where he thought things were going bad and where he thought he Kissinger, was in the wrong.
More contemporaneously, there's a letter to Bill Clinton and even a letter that criticizes a man later at the heart of the recent government shutdown, John Boehner. What was the issue back then?
Well, it's in a very amusing letter. John Boehner at that point was just a junior congressman, and today, of course, he's the Speaker of the House. And he had fallen for a fraudulent quote from Abraham Lincoln, which a lot of Republicans have fallen for because they tend to confirm their very conservative ideological preconceptions on politics in America. And so what my father did was write Boehner a letter and say, you know, you've been caught up in a scam. The quotes you have of Lincoln that you put into the congressional record back in 1991 are all fraudulent. This fraud has continued on, and my father tried to stop it with Boehner with no success.
Stephen Schlesinger is a one-time journalist, former director of the World Policy Institute, and now co-editor with his brother Andrew of The Letters of Arthur Schlesinger, Jr., new this week from Random House.
Now, this quote from the news, pleased, is an understatement. That was lawyer Hubert Santos after a judge ordered a retrial for his client Michael Skakel in the 1975 killing of a teenage girl on grounds that the Kennedy relative's lawyer at that time did not provide an adequate defense.
Next, the politics behind all those public service announcements on radio and TV. For your ears only.